The remaining cases on the Supreme Court's docket involve a number of hot-button issues like the president's tax returns and also abortion access. And on the heels of major decisions about LGBTQ rights and DACA, the right has expressed some concerns about the Supreme Court.
That's right. Conservatives in particular are watching how Justice Roberts will vote on the latest abortion case in front of the court. Now, the Conservative Partnership Institute's Senior Director of Policy, Rachel Bovard, she joins us now via Skype with her perspective. Good to see you, Rachel.
Good to see you guys.
Absolutely. We miss having you in the studio. But Rachel, you've been talking a lot about the court and about the conservative obsession with it. And one of the things that you've really emphasized is that, look, guys, the courts will not save you, even though that has been the de facto position of the American right now for literally decades. Could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so this really has been both a political and an electoral strategy for the right, for the political conservative right, to say, look, elect us because we'll put more GOP-stamped judges into the courts and it will solve all our problems. And don't worry, we don't need to do anything in Congress except confirm those judges because, again, the GOP-stamped judges will save us. And I think last week in particular was a wake-up call for the right, that is not the case. Nothing can take the place of actual legislating, grappling with the hard questions, taking on a lot of these cultural moments and dealing with them as an elected self-government is supposed to do. And so I think you're seeing repudiation of that strategy, and the right is being forced to grapple with it now, I hope, in a very public way.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is the alternative, though? Because we'll talk more specifically about the abortion case. I think abortion is very sort of like 50-50. People have a lot of mixed feelings on it. But on the two issues of LGBTQ rights, you've got basically 80% of the public on the side of the direction the court went in. DACA, same thing, overwhelming support from the public on letting the Dreamers stay here. So if you are losing overwhelmingly in the court of public opinion, obviously lawmakers don't want to take on these issues. Like, what is the other path other than trying to hope that these judges are going to hold the line?
I don't think the fact that public opinion is in one direction or another should matter to legislators. That's why they're elected, is to take on these tough questions in deliberation, and they may lose, right? And that's a very natural outcome in the legislative branch, but it's incumbent upon them to force these questions to the floor, to force the deliberation, the debate, the voting that creates a record. And that's why we send people to Congress to deal with these questions. We don't send people to the courts, right? We don't elect people to the courts. They're appointed there for life to be sort of these black-robed masters. We don't kneel at their feet. We actually send people to the legislature to debate these questions. And I think on the issue, of LGBTQ equality that came up before the court, and same with DACA, the merits of those issues aside, there's a lot of ripple effects that those decisions have that our legislator really needs to be dealing with, particularly on the Bostock case. This is going to ripple into religious liberty in ways I don't think the American right fully understands yet. Justice Alito sort of listed some of these questions in his dissent, but you're dealing with a sea change, really, right, for how people of faith, and not just conservative people of faith, but how people of faith live in this country. And the legislature, to a great extent, responded by just shrugging, right?
And I think,
well, Gorsuch is independent. Great.
Yeah, I think that's the key, Rachel, which is that, look, I mean, if the legislature does that, then they can define how exactly this goes one way. Even if they're reacting to public opinion, it's a matter of deliberation. It's a matter of up or down votes. But with the courts, and you're kind of like, well, did he mean it this way? Did he mean it that way? And it just becomes this kind of like extrajudicial framework of which we all live, and nobody really knows why. And one of the other things I wanted to get your take on, which is that this was a real indictment of the Federalist Society, right? And of a lot of the ways that they have said, they've been like, oh, you give us millions of dollars, we'll make sure that we'll protect this conservative base, and in exchange, you have to vote for pro-big business judges. And they created this whole ideology around that. And yet we've seen kind of what happens to the natural extent of that ideology. Do you actually think that anything will change as a result of this? Like, Will there be real pushback against the Federalist Society and against the conservative legal establishment because of these cases?
I do think that, there's a lot of oxygen in this debate now, which is really necessary because the conservative legal establishment has become entrenched. And it's become, to your point, sort of a churn of big business favored judges that don't actually care about cultural religious conservatives or traditional conservatives or people of faith. Those issues are not prioritized. Big business priorities are. And, to a great extent, any dissent to that is completely toppled and dismissed. I mean, you saw this. Josh Hawley has been a breath of fresh air on this question. He's actually tried to vet a lot of these judges for how they feel about divisive cultural questions. And the conservative legal movement fell on his head. They treated him like a snotty upstart. The Wall Street Journal editorial board, sneered at him 3 times in 6 months over some of these questions. So I think there's a recognition of the fact that, the room in which these judges are selected needs to be a lot bigger. It needs to include a lot more perspectives than just the Federalist Society.
Well, and I think what you're saying are lessons for the left as well, because there's a lot of discussion with, Joe Biden not being a favorite of progressives of you have to vote for him because of the court. That's not a good reason, right? I think there are a lot of other reasons to vote for Joe Biden. Opposition to Donald Trump may be enough on its own. But if you're betting your movement on the outcome of the courts, I don't think that is the wise direction to go in, because it often doesn't turn out the way you want it to. I did want you, Rachel, though, to preview this abortion decision. It's very similar to another case that was heard by the Supreme Court. Could you just take us into some of those dynamics and how it's expected to be ruled on?
Yeah, this case comes out of Louisiana. It deals especially with, the permitting privileges of doctors, essentially saying that abortion doctors must have permitting and practicing privileges at local hospitals to be able to practice. I wrote about this case a couple of months ago. At issue is just sort of the conditions in which some of these abortion clinics existed. They really treated women terribly. Women had to have full hysterectomies after bleeding for hours at some of these clinics. So the treatment of women, I think, is at issue here. But the left has really made it about, cracking down on any kind of abortion right. So whether or not those doctors have permitting privileges, they say is a roadblock to allowing abortion services.
Well, and
so this is an access
can I just
case.
Let me just provide the left view of this. So you get the conservative. The left view, which is borne out by the data, is that these often are put in place just to close down clinics. Essentially, yes, you're required to get these permitting privileges, and then no hospital will give you the permitting privileges. So it's a way of sort of getting around Roe v. Wade and closing down clinics because you've created a condition that's impossible to meet. So that's the argument that's advanced from the left. How did this go last time, and how's it expected to go this time?
So it didn't go well last time, and I think a lot of court watchers expect it to go along similar lines. But again, to the point that you made in the opening, Chief Justice Roberts is going to be a swing vote here. We don't know which way he's going to go. He hasn't ruled favorably for conservatives in the past, and I think it's kind of he tends to, for a lot of these divisive questions, I think, pay attention to the politics of the moment. He doesn't want to, put it in the open right before an election. At least that's what it seems like. So I don't think conservatives, at least the rumor mill among the conservative legal establishment, is that it's not going to go well.
Yeah, I hear exactly the same thing, Rachel. And then I guess last question on that front, which is that if Roberts goes the other way, and the court goes down on DACA, on the civil rights case, and on this, that could actually cause a reckoning, because, as to Crystal's point, which is the other ones where, the DACA case is only because of the Trump administration's incompetence there. But especially whenever it comes to this abortion case, given how rock solid that is to most of the Republican base and voters, what do you think that impact might have?
I think it's going to be an earth-shaking moment. I think you're going to see a lot of establishment Republicans say, well, it's just an aberration. Let's just keep confirming judges. But I think for the cultural conservative right, that is going to be a sea change. And they are going to, I think, be forced to reckon with the fact that their legislature does not act. And that's the fundamental problem here, right? Mm-hmm. That's why we place so much emphasis on the courts, because the legislature fails to deal at all with these questions, either before or after they get to the court. And so I think for the entire political and electoral strategy for the conservative right is going to come under scrutiny if we get a bad outcome in this ruling, which we're expected to get.
Yeah, looks like it. All right, Rachel, thank you.
Really fascinating insights, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Next on Rising, former President Obama, he reminisces about a president who respects the rule of law. And we're going to show you that and Rahm Emanuel's 2020 strategy when Rising returns.